Hey guys. So I'm probably a little more casual than normal. I'm wearing a cold weather coat. I haven't got my hat on. Um, Camera looks a little closer than normal, but I'm gonna go with it. So today, what we're gonna do is talk about how to basically make it so that you're never trapped in a certain book recommendation algorithm again. And I can actually promise that. If you follow the advice in this video, any singular book recommendation algorithm is not going to be able to dominate your reading lists. And the way that we're going to do that is that we're going to go international. So I'm an American. I lived in France briefly. I speak some French. I'm definitely better at French than somebody who studied it in high school. But if you're like a college educated with a master's program in French, I'm not going to have that. Now, like I said, we're talking about language, which is probably a little bit different than my previous videos. But we're talking about this because I think it can benefit you in two main ways. The first way is that, Goodreads or whichever online store you use to buy books. Where I live, it's a necessity to buy books online. There are not many bookstores in my area. I have to drive roughly 40 minutes to get to the closest bookstore. It might be about 35 minutes, but it's more than a half-hour drive. And then when I get there, most of the books that I personally read tend to be either in a language other than English, so they're not stocked at the bookstore, or I might be looking for fiction that's a little more niche. So online shopping, like it is for everybody nowadays, for me, is paramount to my reading health, if we can call it health. We're also going to talk briefly about Michel Houellebecq. I wouldn't typically probably make a video just on Houellebecq, but I'm going to explain to you when we get there why Houellebecq was the first writer in French whose French I actually read and understood. I've read all of his novels. I read his essay on Lovecraft, but I haven't read his other nonfiction or his poetry. I do follow him in French news, so frequently when he's making his faux pas, and when he's being Houellebecq and curmudgeonly and doing stupid things and saying offensive things, I keep an eye on that. I think he's a very bright writer. I don't think that maybe he's the brightest person. He makes a lot of very severe mistakes in his life and has. They include everything from book problems to his participation in a video more recently that you might have heard about. So what this video is actually about is that I'm going to try to tell you how I learned French. My French is not perfect. I don't feel super comfortable speaking it on camera. If I get notes in my comments that are like, Mark, we'd like to hear you speak French, I can try. I can basically be understood by a French-speaking audience. I will make errors in grammar. So if parler couramment, if speaking fluently, solely measures our ability to react in real time and form comprehensible sentences that might not be exactly correct, but that address the situation, then I am fluent in French. I can speak about most things. If I were living in France, I could take my car to a garage and have work done on it. I could navigate that situation. Je peux faire the course. I can go shopping for the course. I can do all of the normal touristy things, And on top of that, I can read novels and philosophy books. And I couldn't always. So the reason this is so important to you, though, and what I'm promising, is that if you learn to speak another language, you don't have to actually speak it, just read it. You will always find writers who your algorithm is not recommending. You won't see the same writers on YouTube that you've been seeing if you're searching for these other writers. So that's really what I'm trying to say is so important here. If all I did was search for English language fiction, it's likely that I wouldn't read as much as I currently do, and it's likely that a lot of the books that I've read, I would not have read in translation. Further, they might not even be available. For instance, I've talked about Jean-Philippe Toussaint. I've never seen one of his English translated books in the wild at a bookstore. I know they exist, but I've never seen one. And yet, here I am in the United States, and a writer I admire is from Belgium, and I've read 4 of his books in the original French. So, if that sounds interesting to you, I'm going to here say, hello, I'm Mark, and this is several books. Okay, so the motivation for this video is that I have 2 French tutors. One is currently living in Canada, and she's been to innumerable different countries. She's traveled more in her life than I likely ever will. She speaks several languages, and located in Canada at the moment. My other tutor is not from France or Europe. He's from Canada, but he's living abroad right now. And so my one tutor, who is currently in Canada, has told me that she has several students who are not good at reading in French. They're French students, and they don't really they don't find it easy. So where we're gonna start is basic ideas and how we can begin to approach a text. I'm gonna give you an example of a text that I read. And then, finally, what we're going to do is basically talk about how you can broaden what you're reading. So, let's start, and we'll talk about getting your basics. Now, for me, it was French. So this is the book that I used. I don't know if you can see that clearly, but it's called A Short Course in Reading French. I discovered this book when I was looking at basically just random possibilities for French textbooks. I haven't written extensively in my copy of this book, but if you see here, I do have check marks on things that I had translated to help me learn French. So, we're talking about reading a second language. I'm not talking to you about speaking a second language. So, if your interest is French, I actually recommend this book. I've never passed the French class. I took French in college for about 4 weeks and dropped the class I was in. So I don't have any formal education in French. This is the only real textbook I've used. The book goes through basically teaching you French grammar, and you need to learn that. And then what it has is all sorts of selections from famous French texts. So here's Sartre, for instance, and over here we've got Simone de Beauvoir. So what I'm saying is that if you're trying to learn a second language, the first thing is search for a textbook that is geared toward reading. In addition to this, I also have a similar book, but it's of course very different, on Spanish. I have not decided to commit myself to learning Spanish, but for a while I was thinking that I would. I gave that book to my mom. I've been trying to encourage her to try to learn a foreign language by reading. She'd like to learn one. That's really all I have to say about this. So what you need to do if you can't get a how to read this language textbook is you need to learn basically all the grammar of the language for recognition. You don't need to actually be able to conjugate all of the verbs, but you need to know what it looks like when you're seeing a verb that has been conjugated or needs to be conjugated. So that's the first thing. You're going right into grammar. So for reading a foreign language, grammar is very important. You can still get by without having perfect grammar. The same way you can get by with speaking or anything else you might do with a foreign language. You don't need perfect grammar. But remember, I'm not telling you to pump 10,000 words into Anki to use flashcards. Not right now. What I'm telling you is that to start reading a foreign language, you need to be able to identify your verbs and figure out what's going on with them. If you're in a language that has cases, of course you're going to have to learn those also. But all I know aside from English is French. So all I had to do was learn basically those words or those verb endings and different peculiarities of certain constructions. And if your goal is French, this book does teach you enough. I'm speaking from experience. The second thing that I would recommend doing is, depending on the language you're attempting to learn, you want to get basically a beginner-sized vocabulary, and you want to do that as quickly as possible. So what I did when I was starting French, and keep in mind, I was learning French. I used to work a job at the night shift. I work with computers, so I was like one of those guys who, if an alarm went off on some machine, I knew who to call. But I couldn't necessarily fix all of the problems myself. So I had this time that I had to spend however I wanted, and I remember my manager at the time had recommended me playing a Nintendo Switch. That's what he liked to do when he had slow days, and that was allowed at that workplace. Not every workplace is gonna say do that, but anyway, so I was working nights, and I really did work my way through almost this whole book. There are probably a few longer passages at the end I never translated, but oh, here it is. This is how far I got, I think. Okay. So this textbook or workbook really is about 200 pages, and I got to page 150-ish, 146, I think. So I've worked with the textbook. I didn't finish it, but I got most of what was in it out of it. So that will take you hours. We're talking about, this is like a lifetime commitment, which is why I hesitated about making this video originally. But just to get started, you just got to get those verb conjugations down and know what you're looking at. The second thing, like I said, is get a vocabulary. So I actually bought pre-made flashcards. I have about 2,000 flashcards of that. And over the course of about a week, I would drill myself on those flashcards every day. I never had complete retention of what I was looking at. I could pass the test of looking up a word, seeing the card had French on it, getting the English word, but if you had asked me any sort of recall beyond the practice, I probably wouldn't have been able to speak French. That said, it was enough for me to recognize many words. Now, the third step that I used, and this is not yet getting to reading, was that I used the app Memrise. I don't see that app recommended very much online on the language learning communities. I liked Memrise, but again, I wasn't trying to learn French with Memrise. What I was trying to do was just be able to recognize certain things. How I basically did that was that I got the French Memrise, and I blew through like the entire course over the course of about a month. I didn't work a whole lot on word retention. I didn't spend a lot of time worrying about remembering anything. It was all just about exposure and recognition. I didn't need to be able to produce. I needed that basic start. If you can work your way with French through a textbook that is like a grammar textbook or workbook, you can learn just by recognition. You don't have to actually produce, but you can learn a couple thousand words fairly quickly. You will not be able to speak a couple thousand words. That won't be your real vocabulary. You'll just notice them. You'll see that they're words you've seen before. You're going to remember a few of them. That's really all you're trying to do. So that's your first step. You got your workbook, you got your flashcards, and then we got a language learning app. Now, your language learning app, if you're a real language person, Anki is used at all skill levels of learning other languages. It's a very useful program. I'm not in love with the pre-made or the downloaded that I've seen online French collections of flashcards. I've tried a few different ones. My Anki deck, which I haven't used in a couple months, was really compiled out of like 2 of these different lists and then words that I had highlighted and things and added those. But you're going overboard probably if you're making an Anki deck. Again, this is just about recognition. Reading is somewhat passive at least. So I used Memrise. I liked Memrise. Why I liked Memrise was that it basically went through everything. I could see somebody speaking the word. They had videotaped the person speaking French. I used to listen to it on my earphones, and I'd play with my phone. And I flew through a Memrise course. And I probably tried to learn a few things, but I knew then basically what my objective was. This took me probably about a month, I think, all told. And after that, I believe I had just started seeing tutors, so I had been seeing tutors for about a month. I had some experience practicing speech. I used these 3 different tools: the flashcards, the workbook, and the app, and I basically started reading there. So now let's talk about step 2. Okay, so step 2 is actually reading your foreign language. I wanted to learn French. I had been interested in learning French basically since I was in high school or shortly after. I never had the opportunity. I took Spanish in school until college. I'm lucky that I was interested in French because there are a lot of cognates in French. I still come across words that I don't actually know, but they resemble English words. So I'm seeing this and I'm doing that translation when I'm reading a text. Sometimes there are what they call faux amis, and faux amis are fake cognates, basically. Like the word pretender. It looks like the word pretender, but like what it actually means is to claim something. So if you've never seen the word before and you see pretendre, it it might look basically like you're seeing the word pretend, and that's not what you're seeing. You're seeing that somebody is proclaiming something and claiming something to be. When you read for learning to read, you need to not think about literary quality. I learned French in large part by reading Michel Houellebecq. So I'm gonna bring him out and or some of these books, and I'm gonna go through that. So the first one that I read was where is it? Extension du domaine de Lelou, and I read this on a Kindle. This was his first novel. It's a short novel. It's like 150 pages. A Kindle is necessary to learning the way that we're going to talk about this. This is not the copy of Extension du Domaine de Lelou that I read. I read it on my Kindle, and the reason you need a Kindle or some other type of e-reader is that if you're doing what I did to learn how to read, huge amounts of the text are going to be words that you do not recognize. Now, you'll know how to identify verb endings, so you'll get a better sense of like what's happening on a sentence that way. But the beauty of the Kindle or the e-reader also, le lisos, is how they say that in French. That means reader. Is when you touch a word, you'll have a French dictionary on your reader, and you can identify that word. I might have stepped a bit ahead of myself. I wanna say something else about this. This was not actually the first French language book that I read. The first French language book that I read was L'Étranger, du Camus. And I read the whole book in French, and I didn't understand a word of it. I had a copy of the book in hardcover, and I was so determined to learn to read the language, I figured, you know what? I'm going to just read it even though I don't understand a single word of this book. So, we're starting with Houellebecq, and I'm going to tell you why I chose Houellebecq. I tried reading a few books without the reader, the Kindle or the Kobo or whatever you're using, whatever device, and of course I understood nothing. I started using the reader, and I started looking up a whole lot of things, and I learned some few pieces of information. In general, the more recent a text is, the easier it will be to read. And I'm serious about that. It doesn't matter if it's very clearly written Zola in French. You will understand more of Welbeck than you will of Zola because the vocabulary is contemporary. The cognates that you're seeing are going to be more relevant to contemporary life. And if you understand, for instance, that ordinateur is the word in French for computer, you'll see activities in Welbeck, at least, where people are typing into computers using what was a famous French, basically 4chan, before 4chan was a thing. In the 90s, they had something called Minitel, and it was basically online message boards. The first thing you do is you get your reader. After you've done your first month or two, and you're trying to learn the language and you're committed. And you got to be determined, but I want you to just read like 10 books is what I'd say. So you got to get something contemporary. It'll be easier to read. And there's another trick that I'm going to say as to why I read Welbeck. There is a huge amount of sex in Welbeck. It's interesting, it's exciting, it's steamy, it's all of those things. So why would I fight that if I'm trying to learn new words? Do you understand what I'm saying? I'm encouraging you to go after your guilty pleasure in reading. So, if my channel, most of the viewers are men, there's basically no women who watch this. I kind of wish there were. But, for example, if you're a woman who loves fashion, and you want to learn to read Spanish, to read Gabriel Garcia Marquez, don't start at Gabriel Garcia Marquez. What you should start at is whatever is going to be easiest to consume, because you just want to be working with the language. So what I would say would be best would be to learn to read Spanish language chick lit and read all the stuff about fashion that you can find. After you've done this for a while, you're going to learn a vocabulary specific to that genre. So what I learned is that reading novels was kind of a different skill than reading nonfiction. So here is, let's just summarize all of this about specifically choosing what to read. The first thing you want to read is something that is interesting to you in English. You don't want to read something interesting to you intellectually. You want to read something interesting to you where you don't have to think much about it. So there's a lot of schmecks, as they say it on YouTube, in Welbeck. The second thing is that you need to do a lot of this. So you'll go through a writer fairly quickly. The third thing is that you want to be reading something roughly contemporary. I promise you it really will be easier to read. I've tried other things. And the fourth thing that I want to recommend doing is include nonfiction in your reading. Now, the reason why you choose to read nonfiction is that you're reading everything and you're understanding about as much of it as if you were at the pool and your head was underwater and somebody was shouting something on the surface. You might be able to make one or two words out a sentence, and get a vague idea of what's going on in a whole paragraph. But at this point, you're really not going to be understanding every word. So we're only a couple months into our language journey. What I learned was that nonfiction tends to be more repetitive. And I'm not saying people are using the same sentences over and over again. What I'm saying is, think about like a high school essay you had to write. You have your thesis, you have point 1, point 2, point 3, and your conclusion. You can tell me basically what is going on in that paper with only understanding about 5 sentences. The only 5 sentences you really need to understand are your thesis sentence, the topic sentence of each paragraph, and the topic sentence of your conclusion. You can hold a conversation with somebody else about this paper that you just read but did not understand with only those 5 pieces of information. Now, you need to recognize your limits. You don't really read the whole nonfiction essay. But what I'm recommending is that basically you get some nonfiction that you can live with. For me, I started out with philosophy. I ended up rereading a lot of stuff. I looked things up as I went along. I enjoyed it the way I enjoy reading nonfiction. But what I came to realize was that retention was significantly greater with nonfiction, and it's not because I liked the nonfiction more. It's because, number one, it was vaguely contemporary. So I was getting contemporary language, and number two, it's, as I said, it's repetitive. So you don't need to understand every sentence that you read. You need to understand off the bat that in 2 months, if somebody asks you about a summary of a nonfiction book you read, 2 months earlier, you're going to forget stuff. So you're not trying to master these texts, but you need to start somewhere. The other thing that I'm going to say is that starting with reading an essay is different than reading a novel. You will interact with different conjugations of verbs. You will learn a very different vocabulary, and certain catchphrases will appear in nonfiction, and certain, not catchphrases, but like certain constructions will appear in fiction. You'll see he said, she said in fiction, within the first chapter 30 times or something. You'll see that little phrase. So that's really what you're learning. So each genre is its own style or its own skill. And I talked briefly about Welbeck, but I wanted to give you more about Welbeck. So basically it was sexy writing. When I chose to read Welbeck, I made an actual decision. Let's just start there. I decided that I wanted to read Michel Welbeck. I was seeing references to him online and in magazines, and I had not read him. I thought, okay, he's interesting. So then I looked more into him, and I found out that he's prejudiced, sexist. He swears all the time in his writing, and all of these negative things. And I found out how, like I said, the sexy writing. So we put all that together, and I basically got somebody who's writing dirty books that I don't care about, and I don't respect him because he's prejudiced. So to me, that seemed like the best writer I could possibly be reading. And the reason is because I wasn't trying to read every book and really understand the deep, profound things that Welbeck said. I was trying to work with the French language and titillate myself with the engaging scenarios that I just discussed. So you need to choose a writer that you don't care about. So let's just move on to the third thing so that I can summarize everything. So here we go. Let's go with a summary. The third thing we're going to talk about is basically your reading plan and how you can put it into action. I use two tutors through italki. It's a famous website. If I was big on YouTube, I could probably get some kind of sponsorship money for this, but I really enjoy italki. At one point, I had 7 French tutors. They were all affordable, and that was a huge amount of what I was spending money on during COVID. I was trying to keep myself from going stir crazy. So, how do you plan what you want to read? You want to read trash that you like. You want to read something contemporary. You want to be reading in multiple genres. And you want to use an e-reader of some sort. These are 4 things that I could not replace. You need to be prepared to read books that you don't understand. The hardest single language book that I've probably ever read is Finnegan's Wake. But if I'm talking about the hardest experience that I've ever had reading, I've read French books before that I didn't understand anything from. I read Le Cave du Vatican de André Gide, and I didn't understand a damn word of that book, but I read it before I really knew what I was doing. So you want an e-reader, a plan for pulp, and a lot of free time. And the beautiful thing about French for me was that there were a lot of cognates. This video is going for 40 minutes. I didn't really plan this out as much as I do, and I'm really only trying to give you an update. But I promise you, let's say you're a 23-year-old white dude, and you want to learn Spanish. You want to find the sexiest, smuttiest Spanish literature you can find, as recent as possible. And that's probably what you want to read. That, and if you can find some kind of Spanish language theory or philosophy, I would probably try to alternate books. And remember, you're not trying to understand everything. You're not going to be able to retain enough of what you're reading when you get started before you're going to have to read a lot of books. Things started to get easier for me, I'd say probably after 10 books. But I hesitate to say too much. It's been almost 40 minutes. For me, this is a long process. I'm still learning French. I still read French almost every day. Right now I'm reading Lacan. Basically what I'm saying though is that you can do this. Getting a tutor to actually speak the language is of course necessary if you're trying to actually learn the language. But if your whole goal is just reading, you probably don't actually really need a tutor, at least not right away. The final thing I'm going to say is that if you look at italki and the tutors are too expensive for you, or you can't find a time that works for you, there's another app called HelloTalk, and HelloTalk will allow you to meet with people in like chat rooms, and you can discuss basically if that person, say, speaks French and I speak English, we can talk to one another and set up an exchange where we talk together in French for 20 minutes and then talk together in English for 20 minutes, and you can kind of alternate who's tutoring who. Don't Yeah, but that's basically everything. I hope this is interesting to you. It's been 2 weeks since my last video. I just wanted to note this down here, and yeah, you can learn to read a second language if you are willing to spend the time doing it. Really, all you need is time and stubbornness. You need to be willing to be wrong over and over and over again about something as simple as the word for kitchen before you learn how to actually speak. It will be a growing experience for you, but you can probably get to the point where you're reading a second language with access to libraries online and ebooks and so forth. You can probably get to the point where you're reading novels, contemporary novels or classics, fairly comfortably in sooner time than you would expect. You are looking at a learning period in the beginning. I would probably work on this textbook a good 4 hours a day, and then into the app memorize and other stuff like that. But the real trick to learning how to read a second language is finding a writer that you're not trying to learn from like a guru, but who writes about a subject you're interested in. And being flexible enough with what you're reading where you'll read different genres and get exposed to different constructions and so forth. D'accord. That's about all I can say. I understand that this is more of a vlog than a structured video, but yeah, guys, that's it. I hope this fulfills any questions about getting started reading a second language. I'm certainly not. I'm not the smartest guy. I'll admit it. I like to look at my bookshelves and think I'm brilliant, but I'm really not. It's a lot of stubbornness. And you can definitely learn a language just through sheer willpower and stubbornness. And if your dream is to read, Proust in French, I've done it. I haven't read all of Proust in French, but I've read Proust in French, and I never took a French class. Believe me, if I can do that, you can learn. The things that I've said here are really geared toward a literary education, the sense of learning another language primarily for reading. But I promise you these same skills and tips can be used for overall fluency as well. Alright, thanks guys. You have a great day. Several books out.